When Sergeant Daniel Hayes returned home from war, the world around him had changed. But so had he. It had been nearly 7 years since he'd last walked the streets of Milltown, a place where cracked sidewalks held his childhood steps, and the corner diner still smelled of coffee and home. But this time, everything felt heavier. He had survived the gunfire, the sandstorms, and the silence of the battlefield, but what he wasn't prepared for was the silence at home. The return. Daniel steps off the bus in uniform. The duffel bag slung over his shoulder feels lighter than the weight in his chest. His boots clicked on familiar pavement, yet it felt like foreign land. Homecomings are supposed to be joyful, reunions warm, but his heart carried a question he hadn't dared ask in years. Would she still be waiting? Would she forgive him for leaving the way he did? He hadn't spoken to his mother, Margaret Hayes, since the week he enlisted. There were no calls, no letters, just time and distance stretching between them like a growing wound. He walked the neighborhood slowly. Houses had aged, trees he once climbed now towered over him. Each corner was a memory of scraped knees, of laughter, and of goodbyes. The discovery. As he passed Jefferson Elementary School, the same one where he'd once been the kid with skinned elbows and oversized dreams, something made him stop. A janitor was mopping the hallway just inside the large glass doors. The faint buzz of a vacuum echoed. And then he saw her. Margaret, his mother. Her shoulders slumped under the fluorescent lights. Her hands, once gentle with bedtime stories, were now calloused from scrubbing floors. Her hair more gray than he remembered. Her movements, slower, tired, mechanical. Daniel froze. He wanted to rush in, to call out, but something inside him pulled back. He stood outside that glass like a child again, unable to enter, afraid of what came next. Regret crept in. Why didn't he write? Why didn't he check in? He didn't expect this. He thought maybe she'd still be working at the public library, the place she loved. Or maybe she had retired. But this was not the life he imagined for her, the confrontation. Moments later, unable to hold back, he stepped through the front doors. She looked up. For a split second, time stopped. Margaret, softly. Daniel? Tears welled up in her eyes before a word could escape. He dropped his bag. They embraced. No words, just the weight of years passing between arms that hadn't held each other in too long. But the warmth quickly turned to questions. Tension. Pain. Daniel, why are you here, Mom? Why are you doing this? Margaret, quietly, because I had to. They sat later in the school staff lounge, the hum of vending machines the only background noise. Over lukewarm coffee and worn-out glances, a mother's truth. Margaret, when your father left, things got hard. I lost the library job when they downsized. Nobody was hiring a woman my age. The bills kept coming and your military checks helped, but I didn't want to burden you. So I cleaned. I worked nights. I survived. Daniel sat in stunned silence. He had been fighting battles abroad, but his mother was fighting one of her own. Alone. He had always seen her as strong, proud, but behind the strength was sacrifice. Endless, quiet sacrifice. And this place, Jefferson Elementary, was no longer just a school. It was her battlefield. Memories and regrets. Later that night, Daniel lay awake in his childhood room. Dust on the shelves, faded posters, but the air still carried the scent of home. Flashbacks danced through his mind. Her packing his lunch, clapping at his graduation, staying up late when he had nightmares. He remembered the day he told her he was leaving for the army. She had cried quietly, asked if there was another way. He had said no. Now, he wondered, had she forgiven him? Breaking the silence. Over the next few days, Daniel and Margaret talked. Not always easily, sometimes through tears, sometimes through silence. They walked through old haunts, the park, the grocery store, the church steps. One afternoon, Daniel brought her to a small diner. She looked embarrassed at first, still in her janitor uniform. He smiled at her, proud. "Daniel, you held it together, Mom. When everything fell apart, you still stood tall. I didn't know. I should have known." She reached across the table and held his hand. "Margaret, you were out there, saving lives. I was just doing what needed to be done." But to Daniel, she had done more than that. She had held the family's dignity together with nothing but grit. Taking a stand, back at the school, Daniel began to notice how invisible his mother had become to others. Teachers walked past without greeting her. Students avoided eye contact. Administrators barely acknowledged her. He couldn't stay silent. He asked the principal for a meeting. "Daniel, she's not just a janitor, she's my mother, and she deserves more than this." The principal, initially hesitant, listened as Daniel told her story, the resilience, the sacrifices, the loneliness. And then he proposed something unexpected, a school assembly. A moment to honor not just his mother, but all the unseen heroes in the building. The assembly. The gym was packed. Kids sat in neat rows, teachers along the back wall. Margaret, confused, stood near the exit with her cleaning cart until she was gently ushered to the front row. The lights dimmed. Daniel took the stage. In his army dress uniform, he looked out over the crowd and at his mother.
"Daniel, I've been called a hero. I've worn medals, led men into war zones, but today, I want to tell you about the strongest person I know. She's not in uniform. She doesn't carry a weapon. She carries a mop. And she has carried this school, and me, on her back for years." He paused. The room was silent. "Daniel. She's my mother. Margaret Hayes. And I'm proud of her." The spotlight turned. The students stood and clapped. Some cheered. Margaret wept openly. For the first time in years, not from struggle, but from pride. Change begins. Daniel didn't stop there. He launched a campaign. Honor the Invisible. A fund for school custodians, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, for every name never written in a yearbook. His story went viral. Local news covered it. Donations poured in. Margaret became a symbol, not of pity, but of power. And slowly the school changed. People began saying hello. Students left thank you notes. Teachers offered help. Back home, the rift between Daniel and his mother began to close. She retired 6 months later, not because she had to, but because she finally could. Daniel found work in the town, teaching ROTC. He stayed close. They planted a garden together, cooked Sunday meals again, laughed more. Sometimes the bravest people aren't found on the battlefield. They're in hallways, cleaning up after others. They're holding families together with whispered prayers and worn-out hands. They are mothers, fathers, grandparents, custodians, quiet heroes. Sergeant Daniel Hayes came home from war to find that the greatest battle wasn't fought overseas. It was fought in silence, right here at home. And in that battle, it was his mother who stood victorious.